Okay, let's get started. So, Jane, thank you. I'd like to welcome you and on behalf of everybody who's here and everyone who's signed up. And I'd like to start by thanking you very much for taking this time to be with us. Um, so, uh, in addition to thanking you for coming and spending time with us and taking time out of your schedule on a cold and snowy night, I also wanted to thank you because, as we were just saying off air before we got started, it's been, I think I first met you 12 years ago, did we say about 12 years ago?
Mhm.
And even then, you were really, really well established as someone who was kind of like the person to turn to when it came to questions to do with publishing. And you've been so consistently generous with your resources all this time and sharing your knowledge. And so, on behalf of all these writers and all the other writers out there, I want to thank you for that. And then, on behalf of teachers like Lisa and I who teach publishing, and so in some industries would be considered like your competitors. You're so generous with us too. You're always generous. You let people use anything that you publish. So for everybody in this room and everybody out there in the cold, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks
My
for.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
And we're here today, in part at least, to talk about your book. I only have the hard copy of the first edition, but the second edition is coming out in April. And we're going to talk about that. And so congratulations are due for that. But I also wanted to take the time to congratulate you on your career because I think that when you have such a big name that that I get starstruck and I can't speak when I'm next to you next to you in the ladies' loo. I think that there's this tendency for people to just kind of assume that, well, she must have just been born the Jane Friedman. You know what I mean? And instead, I think what's really remarkable is that you built up your career kind of like step by step, doing the exact same things
Mhm.
that you tell everybody else to do. So it's like there are things that have worked for you, and instead of like closing the door and putting your success under a big black hood, you share it with everybody. So, huge congratulations on building such a career because it's not easy. Many have tried and many have failed. Um, and so that's where I think I'd like to start. I think I'd like to start by asking you, how did you go from being Jane Friedman to the Jane Friedman? And to help you frame it, I'm gonna actually I'm actually gonna quote you from your second edition, where you actually um, kind of give tips for writing your bio, your author's bio. And one set of tips are just answer the three questions. Who are you? How did you get here? And what do you care about and why?
Which I think I say in the book, they're hard questions. So we're starting with the really meaty stuff. Um, well, thank you for that very generous introduction. I mean, I've made all the mistakes like everyone else makes, and I think I hope that puts me in a better position to help people muddle through as I have. Um, I have to say, when you say the Jane Friedman, I want to make sure everyone knows kind of the subtext there because I think you know, Shirin, there is another Jane Friedman in publishing who is the former CEO of HarperCollins. And to this day, there is still confusion about who is who. And people in the industry in recent years, if they want to compliment me, they have come to say, you are the Jane Friedman now, which I think that's still a little bit debatable, but I always like to acknowledge that interesting doppelganger that has followed me throughout my career. And there are lots of funny stories related to that, which I'll put aside for now. But anyway, to answer the three questions, I've always been in the publishing industry. I have always somehow been writing since I was in middle school. And so a lot of what I've been doing is about consistency of purpose year after year after year. A lot of people don't have the ability to do that. Now, that's not to say I didn't do a lot of things that I no longer participate in. Like I had all the fast food jobs. I worked at an amusement park. Like I spent a lot of time doing things just to make my living. Barista was in there too. But I never lost sight of what I wanted to accomplish in writing and publishing. Um, and I think for me, the tipping point was really leaving corporate publishing and deciding who was I after I was no longer affiliated with this publishing company, when I was no longer affiliated with Writer's Digest specifically, because there was a bit of an identity crisis that formed since I had aligned myself with that brand for more than 10 years. Um, so, there was, I definitely spent about 5 years figuring out what sort of work I wanted to focus on. And I've done a lot of different things that I no longer pursue. I've had two business partnerships that came to an end. But I think at this point, I have found what I'm likely going to focus on for the next 10 to 20 years, which is helping people on the business side. And obviously this book underlines all of that. So I'll pause there and
Well, thanks for the pause because I wanted to scroll back half a beat. And you said, so since middle school, you've been writing. And
mhm.
you talk about having consistency of purpose, which obviously, can adjust as you go through life. But when you were in middle school and writing, what did you want to write? Like what was your purpose then?
Oh, I didn't know. I just thought it was nice to have things published. Um,
Well, the
there
purpose is to be published, in which you have eminently succeeded. But,
there was a newspaper in my middle school that was nothing more than like a single mimeographed sheet. This was like before Xerox.
Mhm.
Um, and it was in seventh grade where the teacher basically chose an editor in chief for this publication. Now, that was a very fancy term for someone who basically wrote I would say the op-ed for each issue, and then the teacher really assembled most of it. And I didn't really know what it meant to write an op-ed. Like my teacher had to tell me what it meant. So that was, but I just like the idea of having to write something for every issue and it being distributed to the whole school. So, in that, my motivations, I think, are really no different from any other writer, any young writer, any beginning writer, anyone who starts out.
And so do you think though, I mean, I think that so you're talking right now to a room that's I'm going to say 90% fiction writers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and 90% of that 90% I would say are novelists.
Yes.
So we have some children's writers with us, we have some short story writers with us, some memoirists, and a couple of nonfiction writers. But just so that you know what this room looks like.
Yeah.
So I noticed, kind of jumping ahead of myself a little, but here goes. I noticed in the second edition, the difference between the second edition and the first edition. It seemed to me that there was like that there was like a pivot in the kind of the voice and the approach that you took in speaking to authors. And so I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I made an attempt. So I want to see whether this resonates with you. It
Okay.
seemed to me that the first edition spoke much more like instruction, like how to, like and this edition sounds a lot more to me like coaching. So
Hmm.
I know it's really hard thing to put your finger on, but it's a difference between when I teach and when I coach. When
Yeah.
I'm teaching, it's kind of out there. It's like I'm the authority. Do this and it'll help you. And then when you're coaching, you're kind of bringing the person with you much more. And I saw that in, for example, your first chapter, the first edition is called First Steps, which, and then a list of what you should look out for, what you need to do. And this time you start off with mindset matters, which
Right.
seems to me kind of that was like, that's a coaching thing, I thought.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so I was wondering, is that what drove the revision? Why did you feel this revision was necessary at this time? And and what were you trying to, because you said in your introduction that there's hardly a paragraph in there that hasn't been rewritten.
Yeah.
So why such a huge rewrite on a book that's selling very well? So why, what was your purpose?
Well, to be really honest with the first, I mean, there are several answers, but to be very honest with the first most practical answer, the publisher asked me to revise it. uh, and, if for those who've been maybe listening to me for a long time, you probably know my dirty secret, which is I don't like writing books. Um, it's not that I don't like books, it's just that writing a book is hellishly difficult. It takes a lot of time, it's very painful. There are a lot of things I would rather be doing than writing a book. So it was probably unlikely I was going to revise it without the publisher nudging me to do so.
Mhm.
That said, there was so much about the book I did want to change. It's not that I thought it still held true. It came out in 2018, which means it was written mostly in 2015, 2016. I wouldn't say the publishing industry has changed dramatically, but enough has changed that some of the book felt outdated or tired. And so there were some of those, especially with the magazine and digital media side, which the first edition spent a lot of time on. And I just took that out for the second edition for the most part, because who knows what's going to happen. Um, but then there's the difference that you noticed, which is the longer I'm in this career, the more I think mindset matters, and you have to address those issues first. In the prior edition, I was very much coming out guns blazing with business strategy and thinking about lead generation and trying to like kind of get people like whip them into shape. Like you're not going to be soft about this. Look, here's how it works. But I think that's really hard for people. Um, it's hard to get people on the same page as you if you begin in that way. The other thing is that even if people do get on board with me with all of the pragmatic business pieces that I think they need to acknowledge and learn about, what's most likely to trip them up isn't going to be a P&L statement or a lead generation problem. It's going to be doubt, self-doubt. It's going to be rejection. It's going to be any number of things that are really internal issues, suffering, bad luck, all sorts of things that can torpedo your progress.
Mhm. And I would say a big part, at least, what I'm teaching and coaching, a big part is having ex realistic expectations.
Yeah,
And it's amazing. Debut authors cannot be blamed because it's so hard to get that information.
yeah,
I think that one of the things that I liked about your book is that you actually give advance and royalty information, chapter 11, everybody,
yes,
and and projected sales figures,
yeah,
chapter 18, everyone. So but that's like a level of granularity that you can, fall over backwards and you can't find half the time. It's
yeah,
impossible to get a grasp on that. And what I used to do for my writers is show them, the little pub lunch thing of
mm-hmm.
what is a good deal, what is, their little code, because
Yeah,
they'll just say good deal, great deal, and then they have a little key that says what a good
right,
deal, what a great deal is. And you just know those figures are so out of whack with what the average author thinks is going to come their way if they get even a normal deal.
yeah.
So how do you, in addition to providing the information, like how do you kind of deal with that in the writers that you come across and
Yeah, so this is, I guess, the tough love part of it, which hasn't gone away. That's always been part of this book and also part of my approach generally over the years. I never want to discourage people, but I think they have to know what they're in for, and the patience required, and the fact that it's not a straight line. And this applies to all creative fields. It's not unique to writing. We're not talking about becoming a doctor or a lawyer where there's a prescribed set of steps, and at the end, you have some sort of guarantee if you've applied yourself and checked all the boxes that you will have a career that earns you money at the end. That just doesn't happen with artists or writers or other creative professions. So, one of the reasons I wrote this book in the first place was because I heard too many writers on panels, whether like at the AWP writing conference, which is where a lot of creative writing students they go and attend, people who've spent maybe tens of thousands of dollars on their writing degree, but no one is really being upfront with them about the likelihood of earning out on that investment. Sometimes the professors themselves don't know the particulars of the business well enough to tell them what the likelihood is that they're going to earn that money back that they've put into their education. So I didn't want to hear any more writers on panels say, I wish someone had told me the realities of this, at least on a financial level.
Mhm.
And, since I decided to write this book, I think those financial realities, as far as traditional publishing, have gotten even more difficult. Not that I think it's impossible or that anyone shouldn't pursue a career, but I think people are better, like you mentioned the realistic expectations. And so I think people are better able to navigate the business when they understand what's normal and that they're not failing because they didn't achieve XYZ on a very specific timeline. I was just at my high school reunion where I'm one of the few writers that came out of that program because it was more of a science program. But one of the people who I met at the reunion, I hadn't seen him in 30 years. He has started to write now. And I've seen some of his writing because of his posts on Facebook, and I've been trying to encourage him lightly. He has a day job at a bank, actually. And he's like, well, I was thinking maybe if the bank job doesn't work out, maybe I'll try the writing thing for 6 months and see what happens. And and obviously I told him, you're going to have to give yourself more than 6 months for this to work out, and you're probably not going to make any money. But like, that's the sort of thing where there are a lot of taboos around discussing the money, discussing the sales in book publishing and all types of writing, because there's so much status and prestige wrapped up with the money and the earnings and appearances. And I just don't have a lot of patience for that, especially when people are investing a lot of money in this, in writing degrees or in other help that they may be hiring to further their publishing goals.
Do you ever get asked, with the picture so bleak, whether, and I'm only asking you this because I get asked this all the time
Mm.
by very unfriendly people. I get asked whether I ever feel guilty that what I'm doing in encouraging writers to keep at it and pursue it, and doing my best to like provide um advantages or resources or insights, but at the end of the day, still trying to encourage people to write because I want them to write, and I want to have like a reading culture out there on this planet. Um, whether that isn't, well, whether we shouldn't be telling them to all go and become doctors instead, Do you know what I mean? Do you ever encounter that just out of interest? What do you say if you do?
Well, actually, it's something I grapple with a lot. I have a secret Substack newsletter. It's secret because I don't really advertise and promote it, because it's about the qualms I have about this sort of activity that you just described. And the newsletter's name is Sinister Malfactor of Panglossian Expectations, which
Oh,
is
wow.
which is there's a backstory there that the newsletter will tell you if you want to go look for it. But it's essentially saying I am someone who promotes idealistic dreams in a way that is slightly sinister. Um, which it's all tongue in cheek. Like, this is exactly what I'm trying not to do. I think the only honest way to go about helping writers is to give them the information they need to make the best decision going forward. So I think that people like you and many of my colleagues that I work with, we're trying to be as forthright as possible about what it takes, giving people the tools that meet them where they're at for their budget, and discouraging them from doing things that they might regret later. Um, there are so many negative signals out there about writing and publishing, generally about how difficult it is, and then there's the technological piece that's scaring people now with AI. There's so many negative signals. People need some sort of, they need helpers. They need encouragement that this isn't a wasted effort. Like, there is value in what you're pursuing, but let's be honest about the monetary reward that's likely to be at the end of it. And if that's something you need to adjust accordingly. Um, there was something else I wanted to point out, and I've now lost it, but I'm sure it'll come up again.
Okay. So while we're on the subject of what we're both doing here, I think that where you and I differ a little bit, at least in as regards to this book, but I think also more generally with the information and the services that you provide through your website and when you teach, is that you always take like kind of like a long view. You're really coaching the writer as far as how to develop a career, like how to make this sustained, how to hopefully get a, some kind of living out of it. Um, whereas whereas I am much more focused on, okay, this book, like how do you make this book the best book, and then how do you get this book out there? So I was wondering, it's kind of this writing, so you want to be a career writer approach, I think is the more unusual framing. What made you decide to frame this way?
Part of it is optimism that I think it's possible if that's what you want. You just have to set out with that intention and make choices accordingly to help fulfill that goal. I've spent already a lot of time talking about the negative messaging and the difficulty, but part of the difficulty and the negative messaging that's out there is simply because people have the unrealistic expectations. People aren't telling them what steps might be involved in creating a living from it. And they aren't thinking strategically about their writing as something that is, in fact, a business. I think that's often ignored. And I also feel like, on a philosophical level, like a deep belief level, that art and business can coexist and are actually better when they coexist. I think it's good. I think it was Robert Frost. Was it? This comes from a poetry class that I took. There was a quote about how tennis wouldn't be worth the game if there weren't a net on the court. And I kind of feel the same way about creating art. It's actually good to have some restrictions. I think that's what allows creativity to flourish. So the fact that there are certain things that the market doesn't like, or there are certain things that the market does like, being able to still create what you want with the guardrails or with the friction, however you want, with the net, whatever metaphor you want to use. I think this is healthy. I don't think pure art or pure business, either one by itself, is actually all that ideal. And there's a really wonderful like little Muppet skit that I sometimes show when I give a talk. It's a Jim Henson skit, like early in his career, before the Muppets were a thing, where it shows some art Muppets and some business Muppets fighting. There's a really great book called Make Art, Make Money that's essentially a biography of Jim Henson, looking at his career through the lens of how he made art and business dance. So I think, I think that that's why you see this book as it is, that it's totally fine if you want to write and you have no long-term career goals associated with it. but it always makes me sad that people aren't given the tools or given the path or option of paths of what it would look like and how to make that happen if it is indeed what they want. I mean, it's what I wanted. Part of it, it's personal. Like, this is what I wanted. I figured it out. This was my intent. But so many people just don't set that intent to begin with.
Mhm, mhm. And I think what resonates for me as well is that by having this kind of career approach where, you can make this happen for yourself, but but let's be realistic about what you're going to get from your book royalties, and
Mhm.
let's see what else might have to happen. Um, in the end, you actually lead to the life that I am having, right? It's like I am one of very few of my writing friends who can say that 100% of my life is funded by writing, but it's not funded by royalties.
Right.
It's funded by the fact that I teach writing, that I edit, that you know, I had a moment. So I've been running writing retreats for years now, but our first international retreat was 2 years ago when we went to Greece together. And I remember this moment where I got on the plane and I just went, whoa! It's like, I am taking a bunch of writers to Greece and we're going to write and talk books and eat Greek food and swim in the sea. And this is success. It felt like success. So, and I think that that kind of that acknowledgement that the writing life can and the writing career can actually, it, it could sound as if or it might come out sometimes of necessity because the
Mhm.
royalties aren't big enough to live with. But but in the end, I would be hard pressed right now, and I actually have a friend who's trying to make me do a prioritization exercise. But I'd be hard pressed right now to stick my novel at the top. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you said, "Oh, I hate writing books," I was like, "Hmm." But there's so much else to enjoy in the writing life.
Yes, there
Anyway,
is. Yeah.
um,
I remembered something I wanted to say earlier about, it reminded me of how when I was doing more consulting work where I would meet for an hour or two with writers, these are people who they have a book and they're really confused about the industry. They're not usually writers in their careers at all. They're doctors, lawyers, real estate people. They've chosen some profession that earns money. And now it was so common, I would say at least half of the clients I interacted with, these were people who were now 2, 3, 4 decades into their careers. And they would come to me with this book that they had been working on forever, or they were finally now writing the thing they wanted to do, but didn't because everyone told them writing didn't pay. And there was always, like, I'm not saying these people were unhappy, but there was always something to me sort of just so melancholy about the situation because they felt so passionately about what every single client about what they were writing and wanting to do a book, and they had delayed it for so long. And of course, one of the great secrets of becoming a great writer is spending a long time doing it. So it's like
yeah.
you've, and they've delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and some of them will catch up, but I'm sad to say that so many won't.
Mhm. Yeah. It. Yeah, point taken. I also think though that there is something on the plus side of that, which is that if you have another career that you've done for like 40 years and you're sounds like you've kind of made a big dent in your mortgage and
Right.
there's like there's so much more leeway to enjoy writing and being published for the affirmation it brings you, for the creative outlet it brings you, and you can be a lot more zen about how many you actually sold or like whether this, oh my God, that's the size of the advance check. It's so I kind of see both sides of that. And so my first book when it came out was Stroke of Lightning, like a hit. And the best advice that anyone gave me was another author, much more established than I was, who met me in a green room somewhere, said to me, you've got a lot of this looks great right now, but my advice to you is don't give up your day job. Not because you might not have great success this way, but because if you do this, it turns into a different thing. If you make this your primary source of income, it turns into now you're writing because you've got a deadline, because you need to get it out there, because you need to find the next contract, because whereas if you keep your day job, which at that time was advertising, so that funded everything quite well, thank you. So if you keep your day job, you get to just really enjoy creating this creative space and doing what you want to do in this creative space.
Oh,
So
yes. I would never advocate giving up the day job, um, unless you were just going to do that full dive into, the things I go into in the book. Um, I think I'm influenced in what in the story I tell about my clients is that so many people they stop writing and they just assume they can pick it up and and they're going to make progress as quickly as they did with their conventional career, and there's not a lot of patience um, for the growth that's necessary.
right. And actually that's a really interesting point because I think that if you wanted to be a doctor and I told you it would take you 10 to 13 years to get even close, you'd go, oh, well, like I have to invest that in this career. But you tell someone you want to be a novelist, it's going to take you 13 years until you've got your chops. Um, they're
And they
like,
don't,
I can't do
yeah,
it.
they don't like hearing
It's
that.
yeah, and it takes so, you're right, it takes so long. It takes so, you had a line and I won't be able to find it now because it's in this is the advantage of hard copies is I can just click and find, but mine's in my tablet, so I won't be able to do it. But from memory, you said something about, oh gosh, now I've totally lost it. Now I'll come back. Um, hmm. I'll give it just 1 second. No, it's not coming. All right, so let's talk then about the next thing I wanted to talk to you about was that you put a lot of and we've kind of put our toes in this already. You put a lot of store in something that you call literary citizenship, right? Do you want to tell everyone what you mean about that? By that?
Sure. So the short definition is it's lifting up other writers, literature, things associated with the literary community um, as a way of building relationships, building author platform, which the book spends a lot of time on. Because what I hear from writers is there's hesitation to market and promote, to build platform. No one wants to be self-promotional, which I totally understand. No one wants to hear your self-promotion. But if you practice literary citizenship, which is bringing attention to others, usually, at least, uh, you know, the writers I encounter, you're totally happy to talk about the latest book you read that you would actually recommend, or you would be happy to go to a bookstore event or to a library event or volunteer at a conference. All of these are literary citizenship activities that actually are hugely meaningful for your career, for your author platform, for building relationships. So that's it in a nutshell.
And how did you yourself get started? Like, where did you start your citizenship?
I mean, depends on how far back you want to go, but I as a creative writing student, they instill in you, this is one of the good things about creative writing programs, they instill in you pretty early a habit of going to readings, book signings, author events of all kinds. You either get the extra credit or it's like the most exciting thing that's happening that week or that month in the creative writing department, someone from out of town coming in. And that the whole community gets together and it's an opportunity to meet someone who has achieved something that you want to achieve. or also working on the literary journal as part of the university community, which brings you in touch with the editors, it brings you in touch with the people submitting. And then you obviously you have events related to the launch of that journal. And so I think the part of the point of all this, maybe to some these seem like very simple actions, but I can't tell you the number of writers that I converse with online, like in meetings like this, or that who write me via email, and they are totally isolated. They have never attended an event. They have never been in a writing class. They've never been in a group. It's even though the writing often has to be done alone, I think it's very detrimental to continue trying to push your career forward by yourself at your writing desk.
Can you speak a little bit more about why it's detriment?
Well, I mean, if I look at it from a business perspective, number one, marketing and promotion, it starts with the relationships you have. It starts with the literary and publishing community. So one of the reasons I think authors find it so hard to market and promote is they're trying to do it by themselves without having that community of support, without having relationships developed with other authors. Think about the blurbs you're going to be asked to get, the nice things that people will say about your book that go on the cover. Think about the reviews you're going to need to ask for. Think about the events that you will want to plan at the bookstore or library. Think about the people who are going to turn up. How does all of that work out to its best end? Well, it's because you've also been contributing for many years and you have built up a network of people who turn out for you.
Your network, when we last met, which was like 7 years ago, I thought you mentioned that it was, and I think that this number is gonna be too small because I think this is the number that you gave for an earlier period. But at one point you threw out the number of 60,000. What is it now?
Well, as far as email alone, which I think is a really good gauge of reach, because it's people who've actually said, yes, I want to hear from you. It's around 40,000 email alone. While I was on Twitter, that was a really significant piece of my reach, but I left Twitter more than a year ago. But I had about 200,000 at the time that I left. So now if you look at all of my other social media combined, it's probably around 20 to 30,000. It's actually smaller than my email base because I'm very focused on building the newsletter lists. My website, it's going to depend on timing, like is it the early months of the year always get more traffic because of New Year's resolutions. So like if it's a really popular time of year, I might get 100,000 visits to my site. So that's often how people find me for the first time. And then the book itself, you can look at sales there. I haven't checked my sales numbers on that for a while, but it's somewhere in like the 20 to 30,000 range.
And so this, like, how, if you kind of plotted this on a curve, this growth of your platform, where did it kind of hit that point? Like, how long did it take you to hit that point where you thought, oh, I'm actually getting traction now? Yeah.
The website was really instrumental in being able to build everything I've just described. So the traffic for that really started to pick up around 2012 to 2014. That was when I was much more diligent about posting my own content at my website. Now, today I have a lot of guest people who contribute, which is great because it lessens the burden for me. But in that window, I was posting probably 3 to 5 times a week and getting a lot of people to follow or subscribe as a result of that. And my traffic, that's when my traffic went from like, maybe several thousands of visits a month to 100,000 or more. And so then I used that traffic to get people to sign up for the newsletters. And obviously, so social media, that had a tipping point even earlier. So I was very active on Twitter starting in 2009, and that that grew exponentially through roughly 2012. So that fed into some of what I'm talking about here. But for anyone who's been on social media, you probably know that it's only a tiny, tiny percentage of people who actually, click through and visit your site or do anything. It's really more for conversation.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, I remember talking about platform building with writers, and you say in the second edition that one of the things that you kind of want to educate writers about is how that word platform is so often misused, and how not only is the term misused, but there's a lot of mythology around it.
Yes.
Yeah. Basically that if you don't have 100,000 followers on TikTok, you're not going to get a book deal, that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So where do you see the situation right now? Like what does an author need to have in order to have a good chance, apart from
So,
being part of a community?
right. So here we have to really talk about specific categories or genres because I think the demands are very different. If you're writing a novel or a children's book, no agent or editor is making a decision based on platform, whatever you think that is. They're making a decision based on the manuscript, if they think they can sell it, the premise, if it fits the market. All market factors, yes, but not what is your social media following. Unless, of course, you are a celebrity or you do happen to have a million followers on TikTok. Like if there are extenuating circumstances, yes, that plays a role. But most debut novel deals, children's deals, not YA, but children's middle grade picture book, it's manuscript driven, it's story driven. And so I counsel people in those categories, please do not chase your tail. Trying to build a platform for work that people cannot yet read. Like, why would someone want to follow you if they don't even know what you write? Because it hasn't been published yet. So I think it really puts the cart before the horse. With nonfiction, it's totally different. You do need something. But the big question is what? So this is where we get into all of the myths about what is platform exactly. Often it gets boiled down to a social media following, which is horribly reductive and depressing for everybody. And, you'll even see New York Times pieces with headlines that say, social media doesn't sell books. It's problematic to say that, actually. But everyone knows that social media is a precarious way to have a sales strategy for any book. It doesn't necessarily pay off. So, what does platform consist of then? It's really about how are you visible to the people who are supposed to buy your book, that you envision buying your book. It could be your online presence, and that includes social media, podcasts, blogs, newsletters, Substack, YouTube, TikTok, whatever it is that you do online that makes you visible. But it can also be the relationships you have and the networks you belong to. Like if you used to work for Oprah, that matters to a book publisher. It probably matters to your marketing and promotion. Um, and, I use Oprah just to make my point clear, but there are lots of people that you might know or have relationships with that have influence with your readership. That's what we're really looking for. So, I saw an author really ably promote her book. It was a self-help book without really having any sort of meaningful online platform, just because she had really good relationships in the media community because she had been freelancing for a long time. So there are certain things, there are certain types of people that, because of the work that they do, because of the careers that they've had, because of the positions that they've held, because of the corporations that they've worked at, they have really valuable relationships that can pay off when it comes time to market and promote the book. So you have to think about not just the online piece, but who can you tap? Who is in your corner? Who's going to evangelize for you? The sorts of people who vouch for you. that write testimonials for you on LinkedIn, they end up being part of your platform because they become essentially, I'm not saying you're going to reduce them to an item in your marketing plan, but you are going to put them into your marketing plan somehow, because that's part of who you are. So the platform is, it's your life experience. It is, I have a colleague who refers to your online platform and then your lived platform. Everyone has a lived platform, and it's the sum of the people you know and the organizations you belong to and the people who would pick up the phone if you called.
So you're saying that to kind of build the online platform too early is maybe not even necessary, depending on what genre you're writing. But if you're way out from having a book on the market, putting the cart before the horse. With the lived platform, apart from all the passively lived people, like I expect my mom to buy a case. I hope you're out there, mom. Um, apart from those people, like when would you advise writers to start thinking about that lived platform and start developing those relationships and because you're going to need them way before you launch, right? You can't
Right.
kind of drum up 20 strangers to come very hard to come
Correct.
to your
Correct.
debut.
So it's never too early. So this is where we go straight back to the literary citizenship conversation, because that's part of the lived platform that I'm encouraging people to start developing as soon as they decide, I want to write and publish. If you want to write and publish, there are other like-minded people who will probably like what you're doing and you like what they're doing, and you collaborate, you support. So this is why, when you do see agents or publishers advocate for building a platform prior to book launch, they're probably thinking something like that. Um, but they just express it as get a lot of followers. It's not about follower count as far as I'm concerned. It's about the quality of conversations that you're having and how you are showing up in the world. It's the most important thing is to show up and talk about things you actually care about.
Mhm. And that's like good advice in general for living life, let alone
I hope so. I
having
hope so.
a full career. All right, I want to start wrapping up because there's so many people on, and I'm sure a lot of them have questions. But I do have some big questions I want to spend time on. One is that I really want to focus on this moment in time. Um, you say that you don't believe that all the new technology is making publication more difficult, as some people have said. But I wanted to ask you whether you believe it's making it any easier.
It depends on how you publish. Um, so for self-publishing authors, all of the technology and progress and innovation that's happened in the industry in every in every in every corner, it has been hugely helpful to them. I can't think of a technological development that has not benefited them. Even if it's like blessing curse, if you look at Amazon, blessing and curse. Um, with traditional authors, some of it depends on when you got into the industry, and how you feel about the changes in the industry. So, in other words, change is hard. And I mean, I feel that myself too when I look at TikTok. And for those who don't know, Book Talk, which is the community of book lovers on TikTok, this is a huge, dynamic, important force in book sales and marketing right now. I have never seen anything social media oriented so powerful in its ability to sell books. So I am not on TikTok. I mean, I have an account, but I have not posted a thing. And I don't open the app. I occasionally accidentally see a TikTok because I have a friend who's really into it and she sends them to me and I'm like, stop it. I don't want them. So I understand like when things change and you're like, I don't like this change. I don't want to get on TikTok. Why did it have to be this? Um, but okay, so here's the good news about all of these changes that are happening with social media wise, other things. marketing and promotion related. I find that's where the changes tend to hurt people, or they feel hurt or aggrieved. There are so many ways to market and promote a book. And really, you only have to find the one or two things you do well and knock it out of the park each time. You can ignore the TikToks or the whatevers that you don't like, focus on what you do well, and it'll be okay, I promise. Now, there are a lot of other technological changes you might have been alluding to, but I'll pause there and we can redirect if needed.
No, I find that very reassuring that I don't need to do TikTok. As you know, Jane, I only got on Instagram like one day ago. I'm on my second post. All right, so there is another technological thing. I know that you've had a kind of like a rough bump into it yourself personally, and that is AI.
Yeah.
And how and I myself the other day, just quite recently, kind of got distracted. I was doing something on YouTube and got distracted by something and decided to investigate it. And it was an outfit called go.publish.com. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they are recruiting people to basically use AI to generate new content so that they can publish it. And then they, on Audible specifically, they're working with Audible so that they can take a cut. And then these people who are just doing the kind of grunt work of creating and giving authors' names to their publication venture can take their cut. And then everybody makes money out of AI generated content that someone's put their hand up for. So it's no longer looking like AI. So all of this is scary, scary, scary. So what words of wisdom do you have for us, seeing as you've had a first-hand experience yourself?
Well, this is where I think it really benefits me to have spent 25 years in this industry. You know, before long it'll be 30. I have seen it all. I lived through that really kind of dizzying time when everyone thought traditional publishers were going to die because of self-publishing and the ebook revolution that never really happened. Um, you know, the whole okay, so experience has taught me that there's going to be a huge rush of energy and enthusiasm and startups and lots of money dumped into the sorts of ideas that you've described. A handful will actually be meaningful. But even those that do succeed, it will have an additive effect on the market. And I don't think it's going to be cannibalizing kind of the market that probably this group is most interested in. So human generated content. I do think AI as a tool is going to be embedded in the writing and publishing process in so many different ways, for good and ill. Technological change always, you know, brings the good and the bad. I think we're just at a time right now where there's so much that's unknown. So many laws have also been, I think, broken on the road to the AI tools that we now have. There's this original sin of books being used for training, that's going to be really hard for the creative community to get past, not just books, but art and everything else that's humans have created. You know, it's just going to take time to sort through these really serious legal and ethical challenges. So it's painful. It is so painful right now, but it will pass. I'm confident it will pass. And there will be like new best practices. There will be new ethical standards and norms that will kind of govern this technology. I admit that I am more of an optimist about this than many other people. But I feel like to continue from day to day and to do my work, I feel like that's the only reasonable perspective to take. And I do happen to believe that humans are interested in what other humans do, period.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. In advertising, you know, we saw a lot of technology come in where when I started in advertising, we used to lick and stick things down on a board, you know.
Right.
And so, and with each change, all of this anxiety that meant that a whole class of of the working kind of environment, the working community would be gone. But there's usually, I mean, some people did lose their jobs if they couldn't adapt, but there's usually like a change, and then there's still art directors, they just do their job differently. So
The I'll
yeah.
just one quick anecdote that I love to tell. Um, when word processing came onto the scene, like in around the early 80s, thereabouts, it started to become more widespread. And there was a New York Times column by a woman. She wrote a column specifically for women in business. And she was very pessimistic about word processors entering offices and, the work environment because now men would type their own memos. What would the woman do if not type the memos for the men?
That is a great anecdote. That puts a new perspective on it. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up, and I'm gonna wrap up with I'm gonna just ask you, put you on the spot for a any big trend that you see coming down the pipe that authors should be and aspiring authors should be watching out for.
Oh gosh. Um, is it something, are you looking for something on more on the creative end or the business end? Like what novel categories are
Yeah, just
trending or
something that you can see from your top of the mountain that we can't see in the valley below. It doesn't matter what you're seeing. What can you see up there, Jane?
it's there's just so many different areas. Okay, so here's something very interesting and I think encouraging that I've witnessed in the last couple years. Um, for as long as I've been in the business, there has been kind of the traditional publishing tribe and then the self-publishing tribe. And sometimes these communities um, really cause some friction. Like they tend like one side has a chip on their shoulder or the other side, like there's strange fighting that I'm not sure is productive for anyone. Um, but what I'm seeing more and more is authors not having to choose. The traditional publishing industry, in particular, is using what's happening in the self-publishing market as a way to identify talent and to open them up to a bigger market that they have mastery over, the global market, the translation market, the retail market. And this authors who they are partnering with often retain their ebook rights, sometimes their audiobook rights. It's really up to them because they now have some power, they have some leverage, they have popularity, they have sales that the publisher wants a piece of. And so I'm seeing more often that authors are able to strike only the partnerships they wish with traditional publishers as they continue to self publish. And I see more traditionally published authors who are able to self publish projects and still continue on whatever path they've been on with traditional if they wish. So I like seeing these choices open up. And I think it decreases kind of that tribalism that occurs between those two paths. Not that they're the only two paths, there are all sorts of gray areas here too. But I really didn't like the period of time where publishers were so restrictive about what an author could or couldn't do or how they could publish.
Mhm. That is encouraging. I think though that just in case anyone misunderstood, the big caveat though is that what you're talking about is an author giving one set of the rights to the book, to the traditional houses, and then keeping some of the other rights to ebooks and audio or what have you for themselves. You're not talking about what I think you and I both agree is a big mistake. Um, self-publishing first in the hopes that then a traditional publisher is going to come in and pick it up, which does happen sometimes, but more often than not does not happen.
Correct. So traditional publishers will pick up self-published projects and republish them, but only after they have made a lot of money.
Yeah, when they turn numbers where you say, well, what you actually don't need the traditional publisher at this
Correct.
point. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I know because I've had so many clients come to me and say, well, can't I ask them to traditionally publish it now? And I'm like, no, because you didn't sell enough copies, so it's not
That's
going
right.
to. Yeah. Okay. So my last thing, and I promise this is the last thing. You in early in your second edition, in chapter 2, you have another little anecdote, which is Djokovic saying, I can carry on playing at this level because I like hitting the tennis ball. And so I want to end tonight, or my part of tonight, by just asking you, what's your tennis ball? What keeps you doing this for the nearly 30 years that you've been doing it?
The satisfaction of writing things that people respond to.
Well, that's it in a nutshell. I think that's what we're all hoping for. So I'm going to open up now to questions from the floor. And anybody want to put a hand up? We've been so thorough in our chat that nobody has any questions. Oh, Marlene, you're waving your fingers at me. Marlene, do you want to go first? And then Teresa, I see you now.
Yes, I was waving my fingers. So what I want to say is, Jane, I believe I first met you around 2007, 2008 at San Francisco Writers Conference. I think I have that right. So I've been following you ever since. Pretty sure I have this right. One of your presentations was, and you were showing slides, starting a blog, like you set it up, and I think it took you something 3 years, maybe to post the first post. I might have that wrong. And I love that. That is one of the best things I've seen you do and heard you do because I was in the same position. And there's the guilt. But then I'm like, wait a minute, this happened to her. It's okay.
Yes, yes,
So,
it is.
so now I have a very successful blog. So I guess what I want to say to everybody is, if you're in that position, just hang in there and go with your passion. That's the main thing, because if you do what you love, it's not work. So thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you for remembering that. That is also one of my favorite little stories to tell. How I sat on that for years and didn't do a thing.
Yeah. Well, now here you are. The Jane.
Go ahead, Jane. Thank you, Marlene. I'm sorry I didn't move fast enough to add you as a spotlight, but I'll do that from now on. So Teresa, please join us. Teresa, what's your question?
Hi. Yeah, thank you. So I think my question kind of dovetails nicely on the last one. So I'm a novelist, and it hurts. It's painful. It takes me, at least 5 years to finish a book. My first took 13, and I feel like now. So I've published 2, and I have a third I just signed a contract for, and I feel like I have a website, and my website says, sign up for my newsletter that I've never written because I find that I guess my question is, what is the best use of time to just a small anecdote. I'm from Canada, and my W.O. Mitchell once went to Toronto, and he was a writer in residence, and he came back to Western Canada and said to somebody, I've never met so many talker writers in my life. And I've always thought about that because it's hard to sit down and do the work. And I feel like I would like to write many things to get people to see what I do, but then I don't have time to do what I want to do. So is there a particular thing like the blog, a Substack, which everyone seems to be on now, that might help with the literary citizenship?
Sure. So the good news is Substack, if that appeals to you, is kind of like an email and blog wrapped into one package, which is one of the reasons it's so popular. So for those who have neither a blog or an email newsletter, I would seriously consider Substack because it's free to use, hard to beat free. Just recognize it could change at any time. You never know what will happen with these platforms. Some of you may have seen the New York Times piece about Elon Musk actually tried to buy Substack a couple years ago. So, you have to understand that these things change ownership. But putting that aside, I think the email newsletter or Substack has such a high value and return on the time spent on it that if you find yourself lacking the time, you really want to get the most bang for your buck in terms of that time, do the email newsletter. And I would say the minimum frequency probably every month, because you need to be able to practice and you need to establish a consistency that people will expect and that ensures the emails don't decay. So if you have an email newsletter and you only send it a couple times a year, a lot of the email addresses will go bust in between sends, and it degrades the whole project because you get high unsubscribe rates, and there are other technical reasons you don't want that to happen. Now, here's what I think is the good news about this, especially if you're like, I don't really want to send a newsletter, I don't know what I would say. I think a newsletter is a piece of writing. It's a creative piece of writing. It does not have to be a buy my book. It doesn't have to be promotional. It's really about staying in touch with people who like what you do and sharing a little piece of what's happening in between books. And since you have such a long span of time between books, I have to imagine that there are all sorts of interesting thoughts and experiences that are occurring to you that would potentially go in that newsletter. Everyone's newsletter is different, of course, but sometimes I think people have strange ideas about about email newsletters when they say, I don't know what I would put in it, but it's like, well, you're a writer. That's part of your job, is coming up with creative ideas of what to put in this thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Teresa. Oops. Okay, next up we have Yvonne, and I'll add you first before I take Teresa off.
Hi, Jane. I attended many of your workshops and classes. So what do you do when you kind of maybe perhaps done a lot of things right? I mean, I had an essay that went viral twice, read over 3 million, have a great New York agent, went to Breadloaf twice, was just named a PEN America Emerging Writer participant. But yet your memoir, because you're a non-famous person or for whatever reason, still didn't sell on proposal. So now I'm going to finish it. Do I just, as people have said, how does a non-famous person convince a big five that 10,000 people will buy my book? Or do I just say independent's fine, university press is fine? Or do I make it more hybrid, as people say, oh, have more how-to in it? Your thoughts, please?
So I would be reluctant to turn the book into something that you don't believe in. I don't know how you feel about adding how to, but generally I say don't, unless you think it belongs there to begin with. Normally when I think of hybrid memoir, like to make it more saleable, I think about adding researched material into it. So that could be a path to consider, but I don't consider it an easy one. So if I were just looking at the more expeditious and likely way forward, it would be looking at independent presses, university presses, and so on, who are going to be happier, especially given what the accolades and the platform you do have are significant enough that I would think a university press and an independent publisher would be quite happy with the sales potential of the book. So that's where I would go. And especially just knowing, I was looking at Publishers Marketplace today, and I happened to be looking at memoir deals. And they were all with university presses and independent presses, unless it was, like a celebrity or something like that. So we're just at a really difficult time right now to sell a memoir if you're that unknown person, even if you have accolades, awards, etc. Nonfiction in general is having a rough patch. I do think this time will pass. So yeah, that's what my gut says. But if you really want to go back to the drawing board on do a revision, if you were, you could try, but I don't know that the results would be any better as far as the big five.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Yvonne. Julie, let me add you first. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here, Jane. I've also attended a lot of your workshops and really enjoyed them. And my question kind of dovetails with Teresa's. Sometimes I feel like the opportunities for writers to professionalize keep expanding. You know, there's so many kind of courses and retreats and talks and conferences, and yet the opportunities to publish get narrower, and sort of that funnel is going in the opposite direction. And so I just wonder sometimes, the business of being a writer, sometimes it feels like on the writing side, like the business becomes more and more about, less, like the opportunities are less for the writer and more this economy that we've almost artificial economy we've constructed around writing. And so being a writer on the writing side, I'm wondering, like, how much should we be trying to safeguard our time for the actual writing? Because I find myself now pulled in all these different directions all the time. And, somebody else asked about blogs and Substacks. And I'm wondering that too, like, oh, should I be doing this thing? Should I be applying for this residency? Should I be trying to, do that thing or this? Like, there's all these sparkly new things to try to be kind of vying for all the time. And then I feel like then it takes away from my time that I'm actually just writing, And so I don't know. I guess I'm just looking for some advice on that front because, it feels like the landscape is just changing so much all the time.
So it's really hard to keep your eyes on your own paper. Whether, and by own paper, I mean whatever it is that you want to accomplish. So I think that people have this problem, especially today, because let me go back there. Shirin and I talked about how I think it was related to the platform discussion, or maybe about change in the industry. One of the changes in the industry, there's now an unlimited number of things you can do to be visible, to market and promote, to write better, to study the craft. There are so many options, and it does create this kind of paralysis and this feeling like you're never going to be able to do it all. So a good exercise might be, I don't know if this will work for you, is to think about, is there a comparable author that's achieved some things that I want to achieve? Like, I would be so happy if I were in that position in 5 years. You could put it out to 10 if you want. I probably wouldn't go out to 10, but is there someone like that where you're like, I really want to be in that spot? And try and figure out what's the breadcrumb trail here. What is it that they did? And if I pay attention to what it is they did, and it could be residencies, it could be a Twitter following, I don't know, but do the research and find out. Does that look like fun to me? Do I feel like I could do that if I focused on doing those things? Does that make sense to me? Like, if I followed those steps, it probably would produce that outcome. Now, one of the problems with this exercise is that you never know the background factors that are playing into this. Like, did they know someone, or did, their luck, timing? But try and look at the available evidence and see if you can create a set of steps that you can see that it works. But the key here is that it has to be someone that's pretty close in time to you. Like, you don't want to pick someone who went through these steps 10 years ago. You want it in the current environment. Now, if that exercise doesn't make sense, then you can just try and look at yourself. I think this is harder because it requires a lot of clarity and self-awareness, and it can be hard to get out of this fog of what other people are doing, what other people want, expectations you have of yourself. But think about, do a similar exercise. What would it take to reach this goal in 5 years that I really want? And what are some of the steps that I think are involved in getting there? I think the hard truth is that there's an unlimited number of ways to reach whatever that goal is. And it's just having the discipline to stay on track, even when people are saying, but you should really be on Substack. But have you tried TikTok? But. So, and I mean, I suffer this too. I went through a really bad period of thinking, oh my God, I got to start a podcast. I'm going to miss out if I don't start a podcast, or I'm going to miss out if I don't start doing Instagram. Like I experience these things too. But I've really found that if I stick with my strengths and what I am genuinely attracted to, it works out. It has worked out pretty well. And I know that I might not, there could be some other career growth that I'm missing out on, but I'm happy with the growth that I have and with the opportunities I've attracted to me. So what do you think? Does any of that sound like it will get you to where you need to be?
For sure. No, that's definitely very hopeful advice. Yeah.
I think really the key to me is being able to ignore and say no to 90% of what's out there, and just and trusting that it's going to be okay that you said no to those things.
Julie. Lynn, I see you, but before I go to you, I just want to ask Jane this question. Julie said that she felt like the funnel was reversed, that there are more and more things that you could do, more classes to take, more whatever, but there are fewer and fewer publishing opportunities. And I know that I think it was only last week or the week before, that these numbers came up that in 2022, traditional publishing industry produced 584,000 titles. 23 was 500, sorry, one more time. 584,000 titles. 23 was 563. And in the self-publishing sphere, the number of titles published went from 2.4 million to 2.63 million. So in a way, that says to me there are lots and lots of publishing opportunities out there. But and in addition to this, of course, there's also content, which that doesn't count now. People who don't even bother with books anymore, who are quite happy to do their memoir, Yvonne, as like a serial, on your. So there are a lot of people publishing beyond the book now. How do you feel about that? Do you think that the funnel really is closing in, or is it opening out?
It's a great conversation topic. And it allows me to kind of go back and say too about this dynamic of the economy that now surrounds writers and writing, and like all of the coaches and the services and the conferences and that is real. You are not imagining it. It is so real. And it's part of why I started that secret Substack, because it's concerning. And it's the same thing, like when you post on Substack about how to do well on Substack, that's the thing that gets all the attention. And that's when you know the snake is eating its tail. We don't want to really be in this situation. And so part of what we need to do here is recognize that there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't need to succeed. You do not need the latest class, the latest retreat, the latest whatever it is. And that includes the stuff I offer. Most of it you don't need. And I put a link into the chat. How can I just set all of this aside and write? And I wrote that post and trying to encourage people to just push me out of their inbox when the time comes. There is a time to say enough is enough. But to go back to what you're saying, Shirin, I do think there are as many publishing opportunities as before. They're just not the type that people traditionally have sought. Mm-hmm. So like with the memoir piece, it used to be that it was much more straightforward. I'm not going to say it was easy, but to secure a deal for a memoir with a big 5 publisher, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen anymore. It does happen, but we're talking about a handful of deals in a year. So those sorts of opportunities, yeah, the funnel is narrowing. But what's taking the place of that? So many Substacks. Now, some see that as maybe not great. There are some folks who don't like what we call the creator economy. But I think if you look at the different ways that we write and publish today, aside from book form, whether it's Substack, Wattpad, various forms of social media, I think these actually have the potential to be satisfying and give us, in fact, more engagement of the type that we're looking for than, or at least equivalent to what a book would accomplish. I mean, you asked me, Shirin, what's the tennis ball? And it's writing and seeing getting a response and seeing how that is satisfying a need or helping people with a problem. Offering this service to people is why I genuinely enjoy it, or I wouldn't keep doing it every day. I get so little satisfaction from the book side because I don't often see that made visible unless people actually go on social media and talk about it, or they say something in a class like this. But when I write a Substack newsletter, or when I send out an issue of Electric Speed, or I do the hot sheet, or all of these things that I publish on a weekly basis, I get immediate response. Mm-hmm. And some people don't like that. But for me, it's like, okay, I can take that and do something new, different, and exciting next week with the feedback I just received. So there are obviously other types of writing where you don't want that feedback every week. But I do think, especially when you put a work out into the world that you consider finished, the opportunities you have today to do that are just so vast and I think exciting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lynn, let me just add yours. What's your question?
Yes, thank you. Actually, it's going to, I think, go right with what you just finished with. It's kind of more specific than what you've been talking about. And first of all, your website is wildly helpful. I love it. I've just dug around all over the place on it. And so my question is about self-publishing, and specifically, what would you see as the elements that would be needed for a good launch?
So the very first book that you self-publish?
So I self-published 2 some years ago that I never took the time, and there weren't the resources to figure out all the other. I mean, I basically just uploaded them to Amazon, and now I have more time, and I'm just fascinated with learning all the elements of self-publishing and what that world is and what it takes. And so the book is done, it's formatted, it's uploaded, the cover, everything's edited. And so now I haven't put it up yet because I want to launch it properly, or at least give it a good go at launching.
Sure. Is it fiction or nonfiction?
It's fiction. It's a cozy mystery.
Okay. So everything starts with the foundation, and that's the cover, the title, the pricing, and then reviews, customer reviews specifically. So I always hate to talk about specific launch strategies or marketing and promotion because all of it fails if that cover, title, marketing copy, and pricing aren't correct. So I hope that you've done whatever you need to do there to get it right. Are you familiar with K-Lytics?
K-Lytics, no.
Let me I don't know if I'll get the URL right, so I'll just put the name in the chat.
Okay.
K-Lytics, K-Lytics. I know they do genre reports on the self-publishing market, specifically on Kindle, which is where most of your sales are going to come from.
Yeah.
They have a cozy mystery report that they do. I think it gets updated every year, where he drills down and shows you, okay, here are the characteristics of the successful cozy mystery titles in the last year. Here's what's trending up. Here's what's trending down. Here are all the covers shown together on a palette. Here are the keywords associated, blah, blah, blah. So he's essentially giving you the formula for what actually sells. If you want to make sure you've got the foundation right, if you have any doubts whatsoever, please go spend whatever he's asking for. It's not that much money for that report because it will save you so much grief.
Okay.
And then the next most important part of your marketing plan will be publishing another book in a series. So is this a series? Please tell me it's a series.
It's a series, yes.
Thank God. All right. Okay, so do you know, I know this seems crazy to ask. Do you know when the second book is coming out?
I don't, but I can make it come out when I need to, given
Okay.
like a set amount of time. I will like get it. I have the not, I wouldn't call it an outline, but I have the concept and the, like a basic plot, and
Okay.
the characters are all established and all that. So,
And what about the third book?
I have the idea for that one too. Yeah.
Okay.
I have
All
like
right.
probably 4 or 5 ideas for what they'll be.
Terrific. Work on them.
Yeah.
And there are differences in how authors like to approach this. Some
Mhm.
like to do what's called rapid release. Maybe you've heard
Mhm.
of that, where they'll release several in a row in quick succession. You don't have to do that.
Mhm.
But I do think what you want to ensure happens is that you get people reading the entire series.
Mhm. Mhm.
Usually I don't recommend advertising like on Amazon,
Mhm.
BookBub, Facebook until you have 2, 3, 4 books
Oh,
available in
okay.
the series.
Okay. Mhm.
I'm not, I mean, just because I don't think you're going to get a return on the investment.
Mhm. Mhm.
So usually you're going to lose money if you're only advertising.
Mhm.
That's like if that's the only book available, let's forget about the other 2 for now. But if that's the only book available and you advertise against it, yes, you'll get some sales, but you will likely pay more than you earn.
Mhm.
Where you make the money is when people love that book and they buy the second and the third.
Mhm. Okay.
So you can still advertise. It might be a little tough going depending on, what the rates are.
Okay.
Do you know your comps?
I do. And I have some reviews, and I have some reviews
Okay.
of people who are like authors who've, published and gotten awards. And so I can blurb and I can do those
Okay.
kind of things.
Okay.
I guess just, I didn't want to just, I'm so eager to put it out, but I didn't want to put up till like, I've like really looked at what all should I do to do that well.
I mean, the good news, if you're self-publishing something like this, I
Yeah.
don't know that there's a whole lot you need to do in advance.
Okay.
It's really about following it up consistently with more books, advertising strategically once you have sufficient
Okay.
number of books out there, and
Okay.
then collaborating hopefully with other authors in cozy mystery,
Yes.
to do like giveaways or bundles or cross promotions, list swaps, all of that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah,
Are you
that's
familiar? Are you familiar with Author Nation?
Author Nation. No, I feel like I've heard it, but I have not explored it. So, okay, I'll look there too.
So there used to be a conference called 20 Books to 50K.
Oh,
and
I did find them on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that used to be a major event. It got renamed Author Nation. It just
Okay.
it took place last week in Vegas.
Okay.
I would, if you're, dead set on this,
Mhm.
like you're committed for the next few years,
Mhm.
I would recommend investing and going to that conference.
Oh,
next
okay.
year.
That's helpful. Yeah, I found the 20 books to 50K has been, there's just a ton of good stuff.
Yeah.
That's useful. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to add like a couple of questions in here. So about this is directed at Jane, but kind of on Lynn's behalf. So about the cozy mystery being a series, wanting to come out, now with my publisher's hat on, I would say you probably don't want to come out until you are rock solid that your next book is going to hit within a year for a cozy mystery. I would say 12 months, 18 at the long short. And then you also don't want, as your writing coach, you don't want to find yourself going, oh my God, I gotta publish, and then you rush the writing.
Mhm.
So Jane, what do you think of the strategy of actually waiting on pushing go on the first book? It's written, it's there, and until you are absolutely rock solid sure that the second one is in your pocket.
I mean, I like that idea, but I'm just reserved in telling people exactly how to push forward with their release dates. So it's your decision, but I do think it would probably be smart to have the second one lined up and fairly solid before you push out the first.
Okay.
I also want to
Thank you.
corroborate what Jane said, that so one thing about publicity, if you ever want to think, any of you guys out there, if you ever want to think about paying for a publicist, the amount of time that they spend on a launch is what you pay for. So
Mhm.
whether you're launching a series or launching a single book, it costs the same.
Mm.
And so the reason why publicity was actually an affordable, and it turned out a really good investment for Goose Bottom Books, was that we held it back until we had 6 books.
Mhm.
And then we're paying for 6 books. And then, on the P&L of a book, it's only 1/6 the cost. So without that, the publicity would have been really hard to make back. But on the other hand, I would walk into bookstores and people would go, "Oh, Goose Bottom Books, I heard of you." And we were like, there was me and a part-time assistant. So we were not in a position where anybody should have heard of us. We had a very good publicist.
Wow. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right, Jane, we have kept you 3 minutes longer than I had asked for. So thank you so much for being with us this evening and being so open and frank and all the great things that you are, and to become the Jane Friedman. Can everybody take your mics off so that Jane can hear a last round of applause? And and you're the Jane Friedman to us, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Jane.
you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank
Oh,
you.
how